human ability to reveal good or bounce back from these dark moments is not limited to things that we can only see.
From Interfaith Alliance, this is The State of Belief. I'm Interfaith Alliance President Reverend Paul Brandeis Raushenbush in New York City.
There are unseen moments where history changes its discourse and humanity comes back to its senses.
Imam Abdullah Antepli was the first Muslim chaplain at Duke University, where he continues to teach and lead global interfaith initiatives. We'll talk about the personal experiences of those affected by the violent conflict in the Middle East and the repercussions of that here at home. We'll also get into strategies for healing and bridge building, because that work is most important precisely when it is most difficult.
You have all these founders from states with established religions. But what did they do? They didn't establish a religion. They didn't have a religious test. I mean, they did everything different than what they had in their states.
Dr. Warren Throckmorton is a mild-mannered retired psychology professor who has made it his life's work to articulately challenge the false Christian nation narratives promoted by the likes of David Barton. On this week's show, we'll get into the ongoing harm this revisionist history is doing to our democracy and our pluralistic culture, as well as some of the strategies for truth-telling Warren promotes in his newly reissued book, Getting Jefferson Right. We are growing the State of Belief, building on our almost 18-year history by partnering with Religion News Service. And as part of the RNS family of podcasts, there's a next generation, The State of Belief podcast I want to make sure you are subscribed to. Please visit stateofbelief.com/new podcast. It would really help us to have you subscribe, rate, and tell people you're close to about all that you're hearing. The State of Belief is made possible in great part by the generous support of our listeners. If you've made a donation, thank you for helping get these conversations heard by more people who need them. If you haven't pitched in yet, information on how you can help keep this show on the air is available at stateofbelief.com. And you can find out more about the work of Interfaith Alliance and join us at interfaithalliance.org. And now, to my guest. Abdullah Antepli is Associate Professor of the Practice of Interfaith Relations at the Duke University Divinity School, as well as the Sanford School of Public Policy. Imam Antepli is a globally acknowledged scholar and leader of cross-religious and cross-cultural dialogue in American higher education and in the non-for-profit world. He previously served as Duke's first Muslim chaplain and director of the Center for Muslim Life. And in this moment of difficulty for interfaith relations and in a highly polarized moment in our country as well as in higher education, brings me such joy to have Imam Antepli join us on The State of Belief. Welcome, my friend.
Thank you very much, my brother. It's good to be here. I wish it was over much more joyous occasion, but happy to be here.
Seeing you does give me joy, and we have to take joy where we can get it these days. And, I want to acknowledge that I think we've known each other 2 decades. I mean, yes. we go back. I remember I had this when I was coming here today and thinking about taping with you. I was just thinking about us walking across the Princeton campus. We met then. We've had so many opportunities to collaborate, work alongside one another over the years. And I just want to acknowledge our friendship and the respect I have for all the work that you've been doing in the world. It's just 2 decades is a piece of time, and we both look fabulous.
Indeed. We are only getting younger.
Listen, I just wanted to check in to start with, as I am with many of my colleagues who have been doing the kind of work that you have been doing and that I have been doing, just to check in and see, like, how are you feeling right now and how are in this moment that is very difficult on all of us.
Difficult, painful, doesn't even come close to capture the deep sense of shakenness and brokenness that I feel. I think there is no way to sugarcoat the seriousness on importance of the moment right now, especially given your and my work in the areas of cross-faith conversations, Jewish, Christian, Muslim relations. In so many ways, we were operating out of preventing the nightmares that is unfolding in real time before us today. We were hoping our work will contribute in preventing what's going on right now in this moment. I have to say, answering a question, how are you feeling or how are you, has never been this difficult since October 7th. And because you want to be truthful and honest to answer that question truthfully, that you are deeply shaken and broken and sad, but you don't want to dump your own depression to other people as well, because people put you in a place of hope. If anything, they turn to you for some answers and explanations and source of inspiration. It's been a very difficult dance to hold that sacred trust that people look to you as a leader and provide them, or at least prevent them from being captured into the destructive hands of hopelessness and despair, but at the same time be honest and truthful and authentic about the seriousness of this moment. It's been very difficult.
I think actually, like, naming the difficulty and to acknowledge it allows other people to acknowledge it and to recognize it. I mean, I don't think we can have, I don't think we can move forward without being honest. And you know, as people have come to me with a similar question, you know, I have to say, I think it's the most challenging time that I've experienced in the almost 25, 30 years I've been doing interfaith work.
I think it's already difficult, complicated, and painful what's going on there in Israel and Gaza. What adds to my pain is the way this conflict, especially in the last 2 months, is spilling over to the United States. It's very difficult to even understand and experience and absorb and digest what's going on there. But the way it spills over to America, the way it sort of challenges us, the way it tests our friendships and our work in such destructive ways, in such toxic ways, adds to my pain. What also adds pain, I think similar to you, Paul, it is difficult enough if you are connected to just Israeli pain. But over the decades of work, you are connected to both and all sides. And in a moment where acknowledging somebody's pain is seen as betrayal, in a moment even acknowledging somebody's humanity becomes a backstabbing or treason, you don't know what to do. On October 7th, I lost 3 of my Israeli former students. I attended their funerals through FaceTime. And within a week, I lost friends, their family members who were living in Gaza or who were Palestinians that I helped in the past to get some education in other refugee camps. They ended up in Gaza serving as doctors, engineers, and teachers. I've been involved with their lives. I married them. They are my closest friends. And few of them at a day sometimes, several of them at a day sometimes, have been killed and murdered through Israeli airstrikes. It's again, very difficult moment. What's going on there is difficult. You are connected to many different sides of this painful picture. And then here in the United States, people are turning this into a statement war. Here in the United States, people are trying to score political points with one another. People are taking American racial or social progressive lenses and forcing it into a Middle Eastern geopolitical conflict and try to discuss an international conflict 6,000 miles away through unhelpful terminology and misleading and false moral equivalencies and comparisons. So again, I hope our conversation will not remain in the valley of hopelessness. It's been an excruciating moment. It's been a very, very difficult moment.
Honestly, talking to you, I don't feel hopeless. It doesn't make me feel hopeless. You're helping to name some things that I think are true. I feel more hopeless when I witness what you've already talked about, where people are just forcing one another into opposing sides immediately. One of the things that is in short supply right now is a sense of empathy across the lines that have been drawn so starkly in such a way that it feels very hard to figure out, how do we move forward? How do we cross them? And all of this comes, as you named, for me and for my work, of course, you have to be aware and invested in what's happening in the Middle East over the years, over the decades. But most of my work has happened domestically. Mm-hmm. And, protesting against rising anti-Muslim hate, anti-Semitism, which is happening, and it was happening before this. This is not the only thing that's happening, and yet we see this, So what we are seeing is that two communities that have both experienced terrible pain are feeling increased pain in this moment. And one of the things that I think I want to share with you is, and we are sharing with our community, is that even if we disagree strongly, we need to show up for one another, especially in this moment of anti-Muslim hate, where people are getting literally shot and murdered, and anti-Semitism, where terrible things are happening to people, and attacks are happening and people are dying, and recognize that we have to show up for one another right now, even in the midst of this terrible despair. And that's very hard. And you are someone who, I'm not trying to put you into happy camp, because I don't think you've ever been, naive, but you are someone who has really tried over the years to bridge Muslim and Jewish divides in serious ways. And, I think that what's important now, and I just want to offer this is, in some ways, my pledge to you is I want to support that work. I want to encourage that. I want to say, even in this moment, in some ways, all that we were building, it's being stress tested in the most difficult ways, and we have to come through. And so the more we can acknowledge that, even as people are frustrated by us on all sides, but acknowledge that doesn't mean that we're not caring. It's just that we also see this need to show up for one another.
Or in any ways we are giving up. If anything, this should, at least it makes me a lot more committed. You're absolutely right, Paul. Over the decades, I made my vocational primary goal is to improve Jewish-Muslim relations. I believe Jews and Muslims, especially in America, had a set of unique challenges and threats, but also equally unique set of opportunities as two minority communities in North America that we could model and exemplify a 21st century Jewish-Muslim relations, healed, reconciled Jewish-Muslim relations, where other parts of the world where Jews and Muslims are living cannot. We had opportunities. And over the years, many of my colleagues, including Jewish ones, they just didn't buy into why am I so desperately obsessed with this? Why am I putting all my energy at the expense of intimidating and even alienating myself from my own community, losing my own standing and credibility in my own community? Why this is so important? One blessing in disguise, since October 7, nobody's asking that question anymore. The people say, yes, this is one of many issues, but it's one of those issues that if it could have been fixed or improved, the opportunities and the gains and the rewards are so enormous. And if it goes out of control, it's affecting every aspect of our life in North America or globally.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're coming up, January 6th is a new marker when we remember a moment where people were taking Christian flags and attacking our Capitol and using Christianity
our democracy
as an attack on our democracy. And no one has experienced that more viscerally, I would say, than the Jewish and Muslim community, and unfortunately because of ignorance, by proxy, the Sikh community and other communities who were falsely identified as the same as Muslims, who have their own traditions. But
if there is anything wrong with being Muslim?
No, of course not. And so so it is a recognition that there are forces in this country that have no problem with Jewish and Muslim relationships going south because it elevates their political aims. And I think that's another reason to recognize that even before October 7th, there was rising hate against Muslims and Jews in this country, rising incidents of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and this has exacerbated it. And so I just, what those of us who are really have to continue to be committed is to say we're going to stand up against hate wherever it happens. And
Yes.
we're gonna show up for one another, even people who we disagree with strongly on the issues of what's happening in Gaza and Israel. But we will stand firmly against them experiencing hate and discrimination or violence in our communities and in our country.
You're absolutely right, my friend. Before October 7th, our inability to recognize these common enemies that January 6th represents. Winter is coming. Christian white supremacy is equally hating us, as Pittsburgh and many incidents, Charlottesville and January 6th is showing. But for American Jews and American Muslims, their inability to sort things out between each other, the external threat was as big as it is, as threatening as it is, as urgently need to be addressed as it is. It wasn't enough. It wasn't bringing. But after October 7, even now, it's more difficult. That's what pains me the most. We are literally walking into an election year where the sickening ideologies that January 6, Charlottesville, Pittsburgh represents is going to come back in vengeance. This cancer of hate, white supremacy is coming back in vengeance, where we are even more divided now. We are even more weakened because of the way this international conflict is spilling over to our American shores.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you have done much of your work on university campuses, and of course, university campuses are places where people are shining a spotlight right now in ways that feel important, but also ways for me that feel misguided. And so I am curious how you're experiencing that at Duke, and I'm sure that you are being called upon to help consider a way forward for how to make sure that all students feel that Duke is a place where they and their beliefs and their freedoms are respected.
Right, right. If we sort of use the medical analogy and consider this recent rise of hate, bigotry, polarization, and ideological fragmentation on American campuses to like COVID, you look at COVID, which communities faces and storms this weather more successfully? People who had healthier lifestyle, who had access to healthcare, who has shelter and roof over top of their heads, etc. I think this recent episode is showing the pre-October 7 commitments of campuses, which university campuses were taking this as a priority. Alarmed enough, morally awakened enough, this increasing polarization, increasing bigotry and hate, and what universities invested, put their money where their mouth is, and took DEI, interfaith, beyond the shallow, toothless, ceremonial kumbaya, and did the real work, and which universities ignored this and did a lip service, just check the boxes with a few ceremonial appointments and events. You can see the difference, really. If you're a doctor, if somebody shows up with you multiple health problems, what you ask is, what have you been doing in the last 10, 15 years? What are you feeding yourself with? What kind of lifestyle? What kind of activities is brought you to where you are? I think a lot of people are getting lost in the moment of the sensational nature of these incidents on campuses. I think for those of us who have been watching this for a very long time and who's not surprised why this breakout of this hate and virus and polarization ripping our social fabric on college campuses should say, look, what's going on in the last 20 years? And what kind of unwise and blinded leadership decisions made us miss all the exits that we could have. This is going to happen no matter what. But if you look into some communities who have sort of taken the initiative and saw the writing on the wall and invested in these kind of de-escalating the polarization and engaging people over very significant disagreements and differences is weathering this storm incredibly more successfully. And I don't want to pat myself or my university on the back, but relatively speaking, I think universities like Duke and a few others who have, you have been part of this. When people write the history of American Islam on college campuses, Paul, your name will be, I hope, some sort of a page or two, because Princeton, thanks to your leadership, hired first part-time Muslim chaplain, tested the water, and made sure when they were hiring Muslim chaplains, it wasn't just hiring to the needs of the Muslim community, but for everyone on campus in a post-9/11 America, making sure these resources are accessible to everyone. They are weathering these storms better.
That's really interesting. Well, I just want to take a moment to remember Sohaib Sultan.
Yes, our beloved friend. May his memory be a blessing.
A wonderful, wonderful man with his wonderful wife and child, and just a dear friend who had the office next to mine for years at Princeton University, and the welcome he had for every single student. And sorry, I don't mean to divert this, but it just reminds me of what a presence he was. And I know that there's ongoing wonderful things happening there, but it is, I appreciate you mentioning that. But I do think it's about, it is an interesting, how do we invest in university campuses to prepare for moments like these, which are always difficult. I mean, we had many difficult moments in the 9 years I was at Princeton, but I'm glad to hear that it sounds like what you're saying is that you and other leaders had invested enough time and capital that right now, with all the disagreements, which of course there are at Duke, you're holding a sense of campus together and a learning community together.
There are many, many beautiful examples. I have been in the morning, attended a meeting in the last couple of months where people are really vehemently disagreeing with each other. And it's not a disagreement over strategy or is it better to do it this way or that way. People are disagreeing morally. But in the evening, attending their birthday parties or visiting each other when they have children at the hospital. Still, the fundamental overarching human connection of being a colleague, being an American citizen, being a responsible educator for young generation, I think more or less the certain relationships are still holding. I don't know how long it can. Anybody who thinks this problem overall, especially on campuses, will be resolved by firing university presidents or by making the right statement by the leadership or throwing one lecture here and one lecture there or throwing some money to this community and that community will disappear. They are just daydreaming. It's a pipe dreaming. So we have to look back and analyze, I think, many things, especially after 9/11, why campuses, higher education institutions deviated from their core mission and increasingly became hotbed of intolerance, unwelcome, narrow-mindedness, places where ideas could be freely expressed and experimented with civility and decency and civil discourse without crossing the line into hate. Like, what happened? It's incredible. On college campuses, we are losing narrative war, discourse war to Hamas. Can you believe it? Or we are losing narrative and discourse war to violent Jewish settlers. Somehow, these people are seen on the pro-Palestinian side as freedom fighters, and their means of barbaric savagery and violence somehow doesn't sort of even fizzle out and dissuade people. And the morally indefensible acts of occupation and inflicting wound after wound and pain after pain to innocent Palestinian civilians, somehow their voices are much more prevalent in these camps. Like, it's incredible. The scale and the depth of the problem is incredible. We have to step back. And what made our American universities great in the first place? What made American universities better than most other higher education institutions around the globe, where freedom of speech, First Amendment, this broad spectrum of ideas in a civil and constructive way engage and clash, but not in a violent or toxic way. we have to sort of strengthen those foundational pillars and ideals. And that will take some time.
Yeah, it will take time. Let me kind of go back to like other moments where you've witnessed people talking to one another, people being in relationship with one another in this difficult time, that you were like, that's an interesting model for the way they decided to engage one another and be with one another and talk with one another and not let it deteriorate into a shouting match or worse. Have you seen examples of this happening either at the university or out in the wider world?
Both are in the wider world, but especially on college campuses. If I can be a little bit, in the interest of time, reductionist, there are three sort of major audiences. One audience are people, because of who they are, their multiple identities, their background, they understand and connect to Jewish pain, Jewish sense of security. They really feel, mostly because they are Jewish or they spend time and understood, they develop relationship. They really understand how October 7 is not just October 7, but it resurrects this 2,000 years of history in such a painful way. And then second audiences, of course, even if they acknowledge that October 7 and how barbaric and how violent, but they know what comes after, and they know the context of Palestinian suffering and occupation. So for the lack of a better term, people who understand Palestinian suffering more. And there is the majority of everybody else in between. So I want to say three things, different approaches, different type of conversations for all these three audiences. There is no one size fits all. For the third category, they are neither Jewish nor Muslim or Arab or Middle Eastern Palestinian. They are just a regular Joe, like knows. Maybe they are more sympathetic to Palestinian suffering because of the power dynamics between Israelis and Palestinians, but still, they don't understand what the heck is going on. If there are conversations, opportunities, educational attempts to this particular audience, saying, why don't you take your time? It's not a dialogue, it's not a debate. Here is a spectrum of ideas, speakers, resources. If you really want to understand Jewish narratives, Israeli narratives, Zionist narratives, perspectives, which is very diverse, here are a few helpful windows for you to understand, analyze this complex, multi-layered historical disputes and disagreements, like a pure, good old education. And then offer a similar opportunity, similarly for pro-Palestinian perspectives, pro-Middle Eastern, pro-Arab perspectives, why they look at the same conflict, same date, same United Nations resolution, same war, but they end up in very contradictory, almost two different experiences. Just one way of learning, those conversations are incredibly helpful, incredibly helpful. I see the fever goes down. People understand, oh my God, I was missing so many important nuances. I wasn't really understanding and resonating. I now have a better understanding of the map and the conflict, etc. For the other two audiences, in a moment of pain, any attempt to, any sort of forced, let's get together, let's hold hands, let's get along, makes more harm than good. It adds insult to their injury. These two communities are in a mourning, in a state of mourning. They are in Shiva. They are in a state of Matam. So all they want is a pastoral, compassionate ears and souls who are, they don't want agreement maybe for the most part. Can you understand my pain? Can you understand my pain within the context of not just one day or one incident or this number of death or that number of death? This is connecting to a much larger grid of my community's centuries-long accumulated disappointments with humanity and themselves. They want a different kind of conversation. They want acknowledgement. And there are those who want partisanship. They want to recruit you as a foot soldier to their political ideology. But majority, they want understanding, compassion, and empathy. They don't want to debate with you. They don't want to understand your narrative. They don't have an appetite for this. So I hope I'm answering your question.
Oh, this is immensely helpful, and I think just really important to recognize that there's going to be different moments for different kinds of conversations, different opportunities
for different audiences and communities.
Yep. And it's just really, I thought that was just very, very helpful.
And that's what I try to practice in my life. October 7th happened. Next day, on Saturday, I visited every Jewish community in my area. And I, as a Muslim, as a friend of these communities, I knew it will mean something. And it meant something. I just sit in a Shabbat service, 5-6 different Shabbat services. And then similarly, I went to my own community. They just want to mourn. Yeah. They just want to say Echad. They just want to say humanity failed again. And that seems to be missing. That seems to be missing in the moment. And those educational moments, especially for college campuses, our failure to not seize the moment. And this is what we are good at. This is what we do. We analyze, we bring nuance, we sort of read between the lines, we question and further problematize. We don't push people into simple black and white reductionist answers. And many campuses, because it's so difficult to do, and so complicated, they end up doing nothing, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has just been, very, very helpful, and as I anticipated, inspiring, and I will just want to share my gratitude with you. And we end this show by asking people what gives them hope. And I know we started out with, a lot of concern and despair, and but I still want you to dig deep and tell me what gives you hope right now.
I am not in despair at all. I am just honoring the series of the moment and honestly and authentically articulating my heartaches, giving voice to my tears and my broken heart. But I'm as more committed and hopeful. There are two sources of hope for me. One, and you don't have to be a person of faith, but if you believe this whole universe is not only what you see, there is a world of unseen that goes beyond the limitations of this seen world. There is a world of unseen. I don't care what religion, what name, what label you put into this. That human capacity for doing good, human ability to reveal good or bounce back from these dark moments is not limited to things that we can only see. There are unseen moments where history changes its discourse and humanity comes back to its senses. I believe in those unseen forces. I believe, especially my Islam, who I am incredibly gratefully deeply rooted in my own faith tradition. I believe in a power that intervenes in human history, and not because of a limitation, but because of the ethical, moral responsibility. There is a set of human reality. Enough number of good people needs to come together to activate that divine help, to unlock these divine intervention, or the world of unseen's intervention. So not only I'm hopeful, but I'm more even committed to see if I can be part of that, unlocking the sources of healing, sources of reconciliation, sources of repair that is not visible to us. We don't see that force. But if enough good number of people start and works hard over and over again, I believe that will happen. And the second source of hope is human history. Not only conceptual, I believe that will happen. Confessionally, I believe that will happen. Human history is full of examples of, from many, many dark moments, Almighty brings humanity to eventual blessings. And finally, humanity comes back to its senses. Post-Holocaust success of defeating Christian anti-Semitism, and post-1973 war, peace between Egypt and Jordan. Like, there are so many examples that in the moment, it's so dark, it's so difficult, but without that dark moment, those forces that needs to come together. Like one of my hope in this particular incident, Paul, is it is very, very clear that if any two-state solution or any kind of reconciliation peace after this whole bloodshed is possible, it can only be happening through some sort of a regional reconciliation where powers like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Abraham Accord countries, and Egypt, it's no longer just America prescribing solutions from Washington, D.C. If anything, it's only making things worse. That the regional powers should understand Israel is not going anywhere, Palestinians are not going anywhere. So one would think and hope, again, that's where I bank a lot of my hope, that given the difficulty of the last 2 months, regional powers finally will do the morally courageous acts of sort of stop repeating the old talking points that brought us where we are and sort of change the course of work, securing and providing safety for Israel's and Jewish Israelis' legitimate security concerns, but also at the same time, and these are not mutually exclusive, giving and providing the dignified human life and recovering humanity for the Palestinians who have been deprived from their humanity for so long.
Thank you so much. Imam Abdullah Antepli is Associate Professor of the Practice of Interfaith Relations at Duke University, both at the Divinity School as well as the Sanford School of Public Policy.
My claim to faith is I am friend and student of Paul Raushenbush.
He previously served as Duke's first Muslim chaplain and director of the Center for Muslim Life. Abdullah, I love being with you. I appreciate you so much and look forward to speaking again soon.
Yes, even though I joined for the first time, this won't be the last time. I'm looking forward to being in conversation with you.
Up next, Warren Throckmorton, relentless challenger of the historical revisionism that helps prop up Christian nationalist beliefs. You can hear full episodes of The State of Belief anytime on our website at stateofbelief.com, and make sure you subscribe to the Next Generation podcast at stateofbelief.com/new podcast. That's stateofbelief.com/new podcast. You're listening to The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.
I'm Roxy Stone.
And I'm Caitlin Beatty.
Saved by the City is a podcast from two Christian women cracking the code of faith from the mean streets of New York City.
Our podcast captures what happens when purity culture meets hookup culture, when distraction steals from devotion, and when the diversity of viewpoints and lifestyles clash against assumptions.
Gotham can be a weird place for Christian women, but we're out there, and we have stories to tell.
Saved by the City, wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks for listening.
Hey there, curious minds.
Get ready to embark on a unique journey at the crossroads of money and religion with our new podcast, Money Meet Meaning.
The seductive effect of money, we think it can do the work that God does because there's something about money that does that. It's wild.
I'm Amber Hacker.
And I'm Tom Levinson.
Tune in for a blend of wisdom and levity as we decode the path to a more meaningful relationship with money.
I think giving, and this is a little crass, but I feel like it's the ultimate middle finger to money. It's liberating to give some away.
This podcast is your gateway to a vibrant and thought-provoking exploration of the interconnectedness of wealth and spirituality.
Join us as we unravel the surprising influence of ancient wisdom on modern finances.
Faith pervades people's lives and our society. And because money is such an important part of people's lives, exploring that intersection of faith and money, I think is super, super interesting.
Get ready to be informed, entertained, and inspired to transform your financial outlook with Money Meet Meaning. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to The State of Belief. I'm Paul Brandeis Raushenbush. One of the greatest threats to a segment of Americans' understanding of our history is the revisionist Christian nation propaganda pushed by David Barton, founder of Wall Builders and a longtime Republican activist. Not being an actual historian hasn't stopped Barton from endless public appearances pushing an alternative reality of American history, going so far as to publish an influential book called The Jefferson Lies in 2011. Soon after, an unlikely nemesis for Barton emerged in the form of Grove City College psychology professor Warren Throckmorton. The Lies in Lies pushed the professor to co-write a book-length rebuttal to Barton entitled Getting Jefferson Right, Fact-Checking Claims About Our Third President. This extraordinary book led to the publisher pulling Barton's book. But that hasn't stopped the make-believe teaching of Barton and company from finding a growing audience as Christian nationalism continues, unfortunately, to grow in influence. Meanwhile, Warren has kept at it. He's blogged, and now he has published an updated version of Getting Jefferson Right with co-author Michael Coulter. And his podcast, Telling Jefferson Lies, launches in January. Warren, thank you so much for being with us on The State of Belief today.
That's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Now, you come from an evangelical background. Tell us a little bit about your religious and cultural background and how you came to teach at the college that you taught at, and how you came to encounter and engage in this very particular, I'll call it a ministry, that you've been so involved in over the last decade plus.
Well, my background is Baptist, and as you said, evangelical in tone. I went to Cedarville College when it was a college, back in the day, for my undergraduate work. I was a psychology major there, and I practiced psychology. Started a private practice and didn't hold myself out as a Christian counselor necessarily, but everybody in town knew that was my perspective on things. I came to Grove City College to start their counseling center, and at some point in the proceedings there, I came over into the faculty. Grove City is a evangelical leaning school. It's also a very politically conservative school. But what I liked about Grove City was that it was pretty ecumenical in the sense that there were a number of different flavors of Christianity. There wasn't a narrow denominational focus, which suited me just fine. So that's my background, and I got into writing about and thinking about church and state issues along the way, about 2009. Now, just like a lot of people, you're a citizen in this country, you give any thought to church and state issues, that's something that's just a part of being a Christian believer in the society. But I started to give a little extra thought in 2009 because of opposition. I started to learn about efforts in Uganda to criminalize, and not just criminalize, but to severely criminalize, make a capital offense, homosexuality. And I had specialized in therapeutic responses to same-sex attraction and homosexuality, so I knew more than a little bit about that field and about that area. But I'll get right to the point. The point is that the pushers of that bill to make just being a homosexual a capital offense were evangelical Christians. They saw Uganda as a Christian nation. And so part of that for them was bringing Old Testament law into their civil law. And I wasn't from that background. I brought up, in a sense, Baptist, and separation of church and state was what I just took for granted. But here was a group of people that wanted to bring church into state. And so I started looking around, where are they getting this? Kind of naive, really, I guess. But and all roads, there's a lot of roads, but as you know, but the roads that I looked into led back to David Barton. And that was about 2011 when that all kind of came together for me. And I started to look at his claims about the founding era, and started to debunk them some, to look into them. And, I didn't think of it as debunking at the time. I just wanted to know. I wanted to know, are these things true, he's saying? And, debunking them was so easy. Even a psychologist could do it. You didn't have to be a historian to do this. But so anyway, I did it. And I did vet what I did with my history professor colleagues at Grove City College, and I started to really enjoy it. Well, okay, that takes us to the end of 2011. I learned that he was going to, he meaning David Barton, was going to bring out a book on Thomas Jefferson. Was advertised by Thomas Nelson, the publisher. And I had already written quite a few posts, blog posts, on Thomas Jefferson, the claims that David Barton had made. So I thought, well, maybe I could put together a compilation of these posts in response to his book. So I get but I also thought, surely he's not going to just bring these same claims out. They again, even a psychologist can debunk these. He certainly won't bring this out in a book. But I got an advance copy, and he did.
And he did. It's interesting that Thomas Nelson actually published it without having done kind of a due diligence around it. And as you said in your updated version, Thomas Nelson publishes a lot of people who are controversial, and they've kept, people's books in. And yet what you decided to do in that moment, and I think it's really interesting, you decided to really take it on and made a difference. I want to just take a moment to acknowledge, your engagement with church-state relations, was foundational to your Baptist identity. But one of the ways you came to this was the implications of what it would mean to kind of make claims about this as a Christian nation, which was, one of them was the criminalization of homosexuality. And the idea that is, that's still kind of out there among people who really adhere to this belief and who still look to David Barton as someone who has some wisdom and some special knowledge about the founding that can lead to that kind of conclusion today. I think it's quite terrifying. So you at this point, you had been, already engaging with Barton, and then you see the book come out, and you tell us when you first cracked it, and you started scanning and going, oh my God, yes, it's all in here.
Well, I don't recall exactly when, but it was sometime around the end of 2011 or beginning of 2012. They sent the book along, and I thought, okay, I can do this. And so I started to put my blog post together, but I pretty quickly realized that we needed more than a compilation of blog posts. And there were other claims that as I got into them, that I hadn't written about, that I thought, well, this doesn't sound right either. So let me go after that one too and see if it's correct. And so I did more and more of those, and this is starting to become book length. And I realized too that I would need some help. I wanted somebody who, to kind of come alongside, who was, more in that field, and who also had some just real expertise in areas that I, was only developing. And so I approached my friend at a McDonald's, my friend Michael Coulter. He was on a sabbatical and doing some work at McDonald's. Both of us like to work there sometimes. And so anyway, he agreed, and we were off to the rest of the races.
Just a reminder to our listeners, the book that Warren and his colleague Michael were kind of taking on is was The Jefferson Lies by David Barton. Tell us a little bit about the basic premise of The Jefferson Lies that Barton put out there.
He put out the idea that Thomas Jefferson had been misunderstood, that Jefferson had been cast as a racist, slave-owning, liberal, non-Christian, maybe an atheist, someone who was anti-religion, that started a secular university at the University of Virginia. And Barton had set himself up as a kind of attorney, defense attorney, to rescue Jefferson from these false myths, these false ideas about him. And that's how he prosecuted the book in a way, is he's Jefferson's defense attorney, failing to consider all the evidence. In fact, in some cases, just eliminating evidence so that the readers don't see it, and pursuing an image of Jefferson that David Barton prefers, that's for certain, but that doesn't match up with the actual Thomas Jefferson of history.
And the David Barton version of Thomas Jefferson was essentially someone who wanted this to be a Christian nation and held deeply held religious Christian beliefs, even though he cut up his Bible and to eliminate all the supernatural parts of it. Am I getting basically what his point of view was?
Well, you're pretty close there. He said that Jefferson didn't entertain unorthodox ideas till about 1813, that he was influenced by some people in his state, that if the influence went any direction, it was probably the other way around. He called the Unitarians that Jefferson probably did affiliate with more than anybody, an evangelical denomination. He just desperately wants Jefferson to be more on his team than not on his team.
Yeah. You've re-released your rebuttal of it, which is Getting Jefferson Right. And in the intro, you say, we thought that if we pointed out the obvious errors in this book, that maybe it would kind of quell the influence that David Barton had over a section of the population by pointing out the obvious mistakes that he made. And indeed, your book did lead to the pulling of the book by Thomas Nelson. But in your intro, you said that unfortunately that has not happened, and that David Barton has continued to, in fact, grow in influence and popularity. Does that surprise you?
Nothing surprises me anymore. I will say, but at the time, a guy can hope for a lot, and I was optimistic. And there were signs of that at the beginning. As you said, the publisher pulled the book, and it was pretty sudden, pretty conclusive action they took. Then the next year, 2013, even Family Research Council expressed hesitance about David Barton's work. They pulled a video from YouTube that had David Barton summarizing the Capitol tour that was so popular among the Family Research Council constituents. But we, when I say we, I mean myself and the final number was somewhere around 34 or 35 historians approached Family Research Council and said in about a 5-minute video, there's about 8 historical errors. You need to pull that. You need to tell your public that these things are happening and that you misled them. Well, they actually pulled the video. Now, they never told the public anything. That was left to me to do. But then they eventually allowed Barton to correct a couple things and put the video back up with no notice of it. And then after that, there really was very little correction, very little change. Everything seemed to go kind of back to normal. I talk about it in the podcast as a conspiracy of silence. And that's not an original term with me. I mean, with anybody really, but Jay Richards, the guy who really put a lot of pressure on during that year, that's what he found in his travels during 2012, was that a lot of Christian leaders in that world knew that there were some issues factually with Barton, but he was just too useful. And that's what I think's happened since then.
Right. That's so interesting. And there's this idea that out there that academics are universally opposed to Christianity or secular in nature, but you've also worked with committed Christians who are also historians, and they found untruths. So this isn't necessarily, the bad secularists coming after the poor Christian. It's also Christian historians who recognize that it's really important to tell an accurate history. And what we're seeing now is a real fight over history. And when you mention things that are just facts, I've mentioned things in public lectures where I've been called a liar by people who have just, I'm not mentioning controversial things. There's, but there are people out there who've been fed a real diet of inaccuracies that has led to a stubbornness of ignorance. So talk to me a little bit about where David Barton has gone since those days. He started something called Wall Builders. What is Wall Builders?
Well, Wall Builders, that's his organization that I'm not really sure of all the legal connections. There's a nonprofit and a for-profit side to the operation. But it's his son, and there's a couple other people, I think, that do speaking engagements. They'll go around to churches, talk about their view of history. They'll put on conferences for legislators. And these legislators are state legislators, they're local officials, all the way up to federal representatives and senators. And the thing that Barton has, and I'm just impressed by this in a way. He has taken the long game, playing the long game. He does these conferences, and his view is that if he indoctrinates them, I mean, that's not his word, but educates them when they're state legislators, who knows who's going to go on and become a federal legislator. And so he wants to work with people at all levels because who knows where they're going to end up. Well, case in point, Mike Johnson, the current Speaker of the House, was once a Louisiana state legislator and has been around Barton's materials for a couple of decades. So this is what David Barton's been doing. He kind of went quiet publicly, but he was very active, very busy, continued to be throughout the last decade, promoting, various legislation around the country that promoted a Christian nationalist agenda.
What are some other figures? I mean, you focused on Thomas Jefferson, which was a surprising figure for me to be such a controversial one. I think all of the early, what they call the founding fathers, must be targets of kind of interpretation. Are there other leaders who the Christian nationalists really want to ensure that they have a history that tells their story of us establishing a Christian nation when it's very hard, at least in the way I look at the history and the documents that they created, specifically the First Amendment, to see that. But are there other figures that they focus on in order to tell that story?
Oh, George Washington and Ben Franklin come to mind. There's the story about Ben Franklin making a motion at the Constitutional Convention for prayer. He thought or he raised the idea that maybe daily prayers should be offered. And the delegates, they kind of hemmed and hawed around and didn't even take a vote on it. Franklin wrote in his notes, or someone wrote there in the notes that, the delegates didn't feel that it was necessary, except for a few. There were only a few that did.
That's very interesting.
So they didn't do it.
Yeah.
And yet you'll often see that story talked about as though they did, because Franklin just brought it up.
And of course it passed.
Oh, well, the assumption you see is
right. No, I know. That's what I'm saying. The assumption is, if you only tell the beginning of that story.
Right. And then George Washington, you see that picture of the painting of him kneeling in prayer at Valley Forge. Washington is often depicted as a devout Christian. That scene that is depicted there probably didn't happen. It was another one of the stories, like the cherry tree story that Mason Weems wrote about in some of his early books that were kind of worship of Washington. And so, Christian nationalists really just go where they can find anything that will enhance the idea that the nation was founded in covenant with God as a Protestant republic.
Right. And that if we don't follow the tenets that they identify as the crucial tenets of Christianity, which are debatable at best, that we will lose favor and destruction will come upon us. I mean,
right.
Those of us in New York on 9/11, where I was, looking up and seeing that Pat Robertson was saying that this was a punishment on God, on the United States for the sin of homosexuality. I mean, it was very hard not to respond to that with a great deal of frustration and anger. But these are the kinds of claims that they are making, and which are very dangerous for our country and the way we hold together as a country of diverse people with diverse beliefs, and a country that has very diverse Christian understandings of what it means to follow the gospel. I mean, they represent a minority opinion about that too. So it's very frustrating to see like how pervasive these ideas have come. Now you're a psychologist, so do you have some sense of what perhaps what need this is filling for people, or have you done any psychologizing about this phenomenon?
I think that, and that isn't my field exactly, although I did teach social psychology for a number of years at Grove City College. But in talking to the real social psychologists, what I hear from them is that group serving bias is a powerful motivation, that we really want to be on the winning team. We want to be on the right team. And when times are, threatening, when times are hard, we tend to reinforce those group alliances. And you really do see that, tribal loyalties. You see those things really being strengthened in times of stress or national tension and so forth. And you see people like Donald Trump taking advantage of that. Demagogues, really taking advantage of the we and they, and trying to identify who are we and who are they, and trying to find the scapegoats. And using language like vermin to describe they. Absolutely. And people who are intuitively aware of this. I don't know that he has studied this at all. I doubt it, but I think he's intuitively aware that people seek similarity in these kinds of difficult times, and it's not the best part of us, to do this. We have as you said, we have a diverse nation, and there wasn't nearly as much diversity at the time of the founding, but there was some, and you have to look at what the founders did together when they crafted the Constitution, and they crafted a Constitution. I mean, you have all these founders from states with established religions. But what did they do? They didn't establish a religion. They didn't have a religious test. I mean, they did everything different than what they had in their state. So what they did together, what they came together to do, is what we should follow as our example, not what they did in their states. So that's been so important to me, and such a lesson to me that I continue coming back to.
I think that's a really important point to make. It's, in some ways, the fact that they had different religious commitments and religious commitments, and they had this, certainly the overwhelming example of establishment of religion, both in the States but also in Europe, and yet they decided not to do it. It to me shows the genius and, indicates the great contribution of what it means to, in some ways, allow for the fact that you are not going to force or coerce or persevere in your religious tradition over another person. That's perhaps the greatest genius that they offered, and I just think it's really important to lift those ideas up. Have you seen anybody kind of come out of this worldview because of your scholarship? Have people come up to you and said, I followed David Barton for years, and then you said that, and I just all of a sudden I realized, this isn't true.
Well, it's not enough. Let's say it that way. But yes, I do get I get emails, I get phone calls, former students. And current, I'm retired now, but when I was teaching there, who I think that, it's really gratifying to be able to turn that light on and to, be able to see the value and the blessing of that liberty and that plurality. And also I just want to make sure, to stress that, of course, at the founding, there was what they did do and what they didn't do. They didn't extend the diversity and plurality to women, to slaves, to to everybody who was in the borders. But that's what the promise of America is to extend that to everybody in our borders. And that's the fight that we have to fight and that's a struggle I think that we're experiencing today. We have a group of our society that wants to go back. And so when you hear, David Barton and others talk about going back to the founders, back to the, back to the way it was, make America great again. Well, we need to make America great for everybody.
Yeah. What gives you hope right now? I like to ask everybody I interview, what sources of hope? Where do you see hope?
Well, that you called and wanted me to be on your show. That's one thing. I didn't, this time around, I haven't gotten as many calls. Now, this isn't exactly answering your question maybe the way you had hoped I would. In 2012, I think there was more of a receptivity to what, Michael Coulter and I were writing and how we were proceeding. But it is still happening. There's still an openness, and there's still a group of people who really, are pushing back against going back, against trying to exclude instead of include. And there are those, there's so many people who want to extend the promise of what our nation offers instead of excluding it. So anytime I see that, anytime I hear that, and particularly from people who are within, I guess what I would say would be historically my tribe, that gives me hope.
Oh, wonderful. Dr. Warren Throckmorton recently retired as professor of psychology at Grove City College in Pennsylvania. For over a decade, he's devoted himself to debunking the false gospel of David Barton and other Christian nationalist propagandists. His 2012 book, Getting Jefferson Right, Fact-Checking Claims About Our Third President, has just been reissued in an updated edition, and he continues to write at wthrockmorton.com, but is now focusing on his Substack, The Throckmorton Initiative, and we'll be linking to both of these from stateofbelief.com. His new podcast is called Telling Jefferson Lies. Warren, what you're doing is more important now than ever, and I really appreciate you being with us today on The State of Belief.
Thanks so much. Glad to be with you.
And that's all the time we have for The State of Belief this week. Be sure to subscribe to The State of Belief at Apple Podcast or your favorite podcast platform, or at stateofbelief.com/new podcast. We need your help to keep making The State of Belief. Become a partner in this crucial work by making a financial contribution today. Information on how to donate is available at stateofbelief.com. That's stateofbelief.com. And if you're getting something out of the show, and I assume you are, share it with the people in your networks. Let's get more people listening and keep these conversations going on Facebook and Instagram at State of Belief. The views and opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily reflect those of Religion News Service or Religion News Foundation. State of Belief is produced by Ray Kirstein and is a production of Interfaith Alliance. Become a member today at interfaithalliance.org. And be sure to join us next week. I can't wait. Until then, I'm Paul Brandeis Raushenbush on The State of Belief, where religion and democracy meet.